Now, we are less than a week away from the European elections, which will be held here on the 9th of June. That's this Sunday. Solange Mougin is in the studio with us to discuss French election laws and how this EU election is proving to be a headache for some small towns in France. Solange, mayors have been complaining about the number of parties in the run-up to this vote.
Yeah, and they've been complaining because of the sheer number of them. There are 38 parties in the running in France for these EU elections. This is a record. But before we get into why there are so many parties, let's discuss why there is so much disgruntlement among some mayors in France. French election law, or le code électoral, stipulates that town halls have to provide a space for campaign posters. They need to be the same size for each party and be in place starting on the first day of the official campaign, which was May 27th. Now, these panels are generally in metal, and they are numbered with the order being decided by a draw or a lottery. Now, there are around 90,000 polling stations across France, and towns generally are equipped to cover this requirement in front of them. But for most elections, there are a dozen or so parties, not 38. And with each metal panel, each metal panel, it costs around €200 a pop. So that's a budgetary casse-tête or a headache for many small towns. And also, space is a problem too.
That's €2,000, and then there's delivery costs too for just one election. For a small town's budget, it's a lot. If we had to do it, we would have, but we couldn't find any.
The mayor wrote a letter asking this neighbour to use their wall, but we had to do it so quickly that we didn't have time to wait for a response.
So, Solange, the number of parties is proving to be a challenge for town halls. So then why are so many parties running?
Well, first, France is not alone in this phenomenon. Germany and Spain as well, they also have over 30 parties each on their rolls for this EU election. This has to do with a certain splintering of political parties on the whole, but also because of how some of the smaller sort of niche, you could call them, parties see this election. For many, it is an opportunity to have their cause or causes be heard on a national and European level, be it for the Pirate Party, the Animal Party, the party that wants Esperanto as an EU language. Now, the list of causes, of course, is quite vast. The rules are also a bit simpler to be in the running. Unlike other elections in France, where a specific number of sponsors is required, take, for example, the presidential elections, the candidate needs the support of at least 500 mayors across the country to have their name on the ballot. For these elections, there is no such requirement, outside of providing a list of 81 names. That's the number of MP spots that is allotted to France in the EU Parliament. And there also needs to be a gender parity or equality. Now, having been faced with 34 parties in the 2019 EU elections and now 38 in this one French senator, he proposed that 10,000 citizen signatures be required for the next election in 5 years. Other elected officials also say things that need to change, that last time around, nearly 20% of voters cast their ballots for parties that never made the threshold of having an elected official. And that has an effect on who gets seats and who does not.
The problem is less about the display than the number of registered parties. I'm tempted to ask whether too much democracy kills democracy.
Solange, let's talk about thresholds, because there are two important percentage points that political parties have in mind.
Yeah, the first is 5%. Only parties that receive a minimum of 5% of the vote are elected and can send MEPs to Strasbourg. For these small niche parties, well, if they hit that 5%, it really gives them a real voice on an EU level. Now, financing-wise, the other threshold is 3%. That's the amount of the vote that the parties, all parties actually, must have in order to be reimbursed for their campaign. Now, this includes the costs of their posters and flyers, be it the ones that you see on the message boards outside polling stations, or the many that French people receive in the mail prior to elections. This is a tradition. All elections, it happens. Such printing is very costly, often in the hundreds of thousands of euros. And on top of that, there's also the cost of getting supporters to stick those posters on the panels. It isn't the town halls that do this. So some just opt out of doing this. And that is why, of the 38 panels that you'll see set up outside of polling stations, many remain empty. But at least we've come a long way from the 1950s, and specifically 1951, when political poster posting was a game of cat and mouse.
France voted after a 3-week electoral campaign that was marked by surprises, ambushes, commando raiders, attacks and counterattacks in a war of glue and paper. The war of campaign posters is without glory or thanks. It's just stealthy brushstrokes. How many posters were silenced or covered over for voters?
So how do the small parties hope to get their votes if they can't afford to print out flyers and posters? Well, they hope that the highly controlled and mandated television ads, which are paid for by the government, will help get the word out. And they also ask their supporters to print out their own ballots from the official site and then bring them into the polling station.
I have a lot of posters that have been put up outside my town hall, but somebody takes them down. The joys of living in Paris. Thank you very much for that, Solange. Solange Mougin there.